The following presentation is brought to you by Nature. Nature. Not a VPN, not a razor or a shave club, not a soap for men or a subscription to stuff you don't want. Nature. Always there. Always free. Always a tree. Always useful. Always available. Well, hey again, YouTube friends. Welcome back. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. It's a Sunday evening. This is often the night when I do a podcast or a live cast, and I don't really have the motivation lately to do them. It's kind of weird. I did a short one the other night, but I'm kind of behind on my uploading of podcasts and also of just my general discussions. To the average watcher of my channel, it may not seem that way, but, it's because I still upload regularly, but, out of all the videos I have, on average, I've uploaded over a video, maybe a video and a half or whatnot per day for the last 10, 11 years. It's always been a thought of my, a journal of my thoughts. And several years back, around 2016, I remember a lot of my content became adults only. And it was especially because I had a cannabis channel where I used to talk about cannabis. And I showed my garden because I was growing back then. And I had this huge outdoor garden and an indoor garden at different times. And I loved talking about it. And after a while, I realized they were all getting pushed to the bottom. And YouTube was kind of doing a purge, if you will, of these channels. Harmful and dangerous content. But at least it was 18 and older. We kind of rolled our eyes and moved on with it. I stopped uploading and just didn't want to share. Some people still do share their cannabis, but there are certain rules and, stipulations in place, of course. So, move forward a few years, and then I started really talking about a certain plant that I really love from Southeast Asia that I've been taking for several years, and that helped me through times when I had pain. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it starts with a K. That's all you need to know. You know what I'm talking about. I'm going to have to speak in code here because a video I made last week got totally removed, and I got a strike against my Carpo's Complaints channel. Go figure, right? But it was a half an hour long discussion that I had about how I felt about what's going on over the past couple of years, and there was no anti-this or anti-that. It was fully open, and I can't even say the words I'm talking about, and you know what I'm talking about. Maybe it would be better to just, those discussions. I wasn't having a discussion about the latter at all. I wasn't into what people do with their bodies, and I found that there's a huge fascination with what other people do with their bodies. And this is why I started off with 2016. And before that, it's always been an obsession by some about what others do with their bodies. And there's always an excuse or a reason as to why people shouldn't be able to do what they choose to do or not do with their own bodies. The discussion of Roe versus Wade is one of them, of course, but that one's way more complicated and we're going to leave it out. I'm just talking about the personal consumer. A person, an individual who on their own merit decides I want to consume or not consume something. I do or don't want something to cross the border of my body, into my body. And I thought about back in 2016 when the certain three-letter organizations were trying to ban that certain plant. And a lot of us, including the AKA and these groups that formed, we had a petition signed, we sent it in, we got results because the DEA ended up having to back off completely and left it alone. They said they were going to leave it in the other three-letter agency's hands, but then they just kind of sat on it. They tried to find excuses to ban it. They tried to scare parents. They tried to scare government officials and senators into thinking it was the most evil plant ever. And a lot of people just rolled their eyes and kind of said, yeah, you've always said that about plants. Let's hear more about this. Because of what happened with cannabis. Since, 1937? And it's still federally Schedule A? That to me is something that, it's for another story altogether. But it's part of the story because it's always been about what people do or don't do with their bodies. Think about back in Prohibition. How long did that work? 13 years? And it fell apart. And it's sad because today you can't talk about these issues without being not just side-eyed or having a controversial discussion about something, but people get actually physically angry or agitated by what other people are or are not doing to such an extent that I've never seen before in my entire life. People would, at least in the past, give people, a break on certain things, like, oh God, a kid got caught puffing, There's this weird obsession with following someone else's protocol that most Americans seem willing to take. They're willing to sacrifice that true freedom for an illusion of safety. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Ben Franklin who said those who are willing to sacrifice that. And I did look that up once, and it wasn't true. He never said it, or he said something similar. Put it this way, anytime you find a quote and you look it up, you'll find it probably wasn't the person you thought it was. But that's beside the point. I feel like we have a problem with information, especially because everyone's so divided. Where do you get your information? Who are the fact checkers who decided to delete my video and tell me that I can't upload now because I chose to talk about how I feel about my children in school, how they should be taught, or whether they should or shouldn't be taking certain precautions? I feel like the role of a parent is under threat more than ever too. There's never been such a disparity of people's opinions on how wide the gap is as to whether you allow someone to parent or you're the kind of person who will call the cops on somebody because their child was at the park by themselves and they're 9 years old. This has happened. Parents have been arrested for this. Hardworking. I remember a doctor, and I think a doctor and a psychologist or something, these parents in this nice neighborhood got arrested because their kid was at the park. And legally, they weren't helicopter parents. It's dangerous. We're living in a dangerous time. That's why me as a liberal, or consider myself a liberal, have changed so much in the last few years. Not in a way where I've gone to the right. Don't mistake me for a red pillar, because I absolutely am not. What I have realized is kind of the folly. I've always tried to be balanced. So I've always tried to look at the folly and the thinking of whether or not the greater good, for example, because I've studied philosophy from at least the philosophers I know of, and one of the most difficult things that I've come across was utilitarianism, which is what's basically greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Is that superior to individual freedom? Is one person's freedom, worth two others? If it's not their fault the two others don't have it. It's a very complex philosophical debate that people try to simplify and make black and white, but it's not. And the question comes down to individual freedom being superior. Always. But that also assumes that the individual has a moral compass to know what's right and what's wrong. And the amazing thing to me that I've realized, if this makes sense, is that so many people, they don't believe that humans have a moral compass. Ignoring the fact that the reason why so many appear not to is circumstantial and secondary, and it's lifestyle related to how much, not to be cheesy, how much love they've had in their life, how much they feel connected to others, how much they've been able to integrate themselves into their society. And people have gone to such extremes. I thought about this. There's different news from both sides, and everyone won't even talk anymore. You've got the one side, the far right, that's always telling you they're always the, quote, patriots. They're always the freedom fighters. Then you've got the far left media. Thought about this. They're always the democracy-based news, or the news for the people. They're the humanitarians. They're the ones who say, oh, look at these guys. They don't know what they're talking about. And back and forth. Never in history have you heard so many media talking about each other rather than the topics. And that's a sign of the times. It's a sign of a declining society, but one that we can definitely pull out of the swamp. You just got to get Yoda to help us out. Our spaceship is trapped in the swamp. So, The one unfortunate thing with both sides of the media is that some topics are not covered by either. It was kind of funny because I honestly, it's hard to talk about the media without even, because I don't watch it, but I'll scan the headlines sometimes because I'll hear somebody say, well, the media's not talking about this. And I'll be like, but is that really true, or are we just not looking? So I'll go, like earlier, somebody was talking about the truckers up in Ottawa, and I said, well, they've got to be talking about it somewhere. So I looked on the CNN webpage, nothing, not a single word about it. I mean, they're talking about celebrities and gossip, but nothing about the biggest strike in convoy anyway in history. Because let's put it this way. If people can't see through the media's bullshit at this point, and they still think that it's just conspiratards out there, and that the media has your best interest at heart, and they're just sharing the news, it's very delusional and dangerous to think that way. And this is why. Living in a democracy, if you want to live in a true democracy, a republic, whatever you want to call it, if you want to live in a free nation, you have to partake in preserving that safety. And in preserving that safety, it means you're preserving it for all people, whatever they choose to do, so long as it doesn't harm you. And this is where we go wrong with the drug war, for example, which is why I started there, sending people to jail for cannabis or back in Prohibition for alcohol. These were things people chose to do with their own body, and the excuse was always that they need to follow the rules because it harms everyone in society. I was on probation once for cannabis back in the 90s, about 2000, 2001. I went into my probation officer, and I kept getting dirty drug tests for cannabis. And we liked each other. I mean, she tolerated me. I'm a good guy. I tried to talk to her, but she'd just be like, why do you keep showing up dirty? She's like, you should be getting off probation. Why do you keep doing this? And I said, because I like cannabis, and I don't feel the state or the government should be able to tell me what to do with my body. And I stood up for my rights in that office with the dirty UA and my PO that was PO'd at me. And she goes, and she says, I said, I don't see why it's harming anyone else, and I don't think it's dangerous. She said, it's harmful to society. I said, how? In what way? And she says, the cartels, and she brings up something about how, because, there's a lot of cartels and a lot of people get killed over it. And I said, no, that's not true. That's what happens because of prohibition. There will always be people getting hurt and people, and I argued the point that the reason why we have these issues is always because of prohibition, and it's the legal system stepping in people's ways of growing their own in their backyard without fear of repercussion. So, I would imagine if vegetables were illegal to grow and people were hungry, they'd probably kill over vegetables too. It's just the way the world works. You can't stop how things work, but what you can do is stop getting in the way of people. So that argument really went nowhere. She ended up making me go to 5 months of drug treatment, outpatient, 3 days a week. I had to drive out there every day, like 3 days a week, all the way out to it was a nightmare. And sit in this class with being the only one in there who was there for cannabis. Everyone else was either a coke head or a meth head or a junkie of some sort, and they were all good people. I'm not saying that they were all losers. It's just that everyone in there was there for a serious addiction and problem. I was just there because I had a dirty UA, and it was ridiculous. But the people who ran that operation, the two people who ran as counselors, neither one of them had ever even tried drugs, they claimed, and they'd never had an addiction, they said. And they'd never broken an addiction, but they were experts. And I called them out on it because I'm like that. In class, called them out. I said, how can you guys know anything about our experiences if you've never had an addiction, But a light bulb went off when, during break, which we get to just chill for 10 minutes in that room. We don't get to go anywhere. We look out the window, and both of them run downstairs to the lobby and run out front, and they're smoking down a bunch of cigarettes.
Help stamp out quackery.
I was just cracking up. I remember somebody pointing that out, looking out the window and saying, look at them. They're down there smoking, telling us about our problems. It's like, okay, that's That's reality. That's the government that I know in a nutshell. People telling you what's best for you without you knowing or being able to choose for yourself, without you being able to make a choice for yourself because you're just a dumbass and you should know to follow the rules, to follow the experts, and to, do what's best for yourself. If I knew a company had been selling bad walnuts or bad, apples, and it continued to sell bad apples, and then somebody mandated that I eat these apples, saying they won't hurt you, and I find out that somebody said, yeah, well, takes about, let's not get into that. Let's just say that nobody should be able to tell others what they should do. But nobody should be fighting about what people have or haven't done to their own bodies. It's a very contentious issue. It's an endemic of stupidity. I feel like we've hit a strange wall, but I think we can mend it. If you're informed, then speak up. There are some very informed people out there who have the clout and the platform to be able to talk about these topics without beating around the bush like I am here. Because I don't have the answers, but I've listened to a lot of smart people who are asking some really important questions right now as to why we're still being treated like idiots. But maybe the answer is simply because and they're willing to follow whatever they're told. I heard someone say, there is no new normal. We're just going to go back to the old normal. This was a doctor. And I said, yes, this is human nature. The new normal, this kind of moment we had where we thought things were really going to change, they're not. Most of us just want to go back to normal life, whatever it takes. And I think that the rest of the society is just going to have to go along with that and accept it. Strange times, my friends. Strange times. But ultimately, I'm not saying anything in particular to or against or for or against anything. I'm sitting here just pointing out my thoughts on the inconsistencies and the fact that it seems that we're living like dinosaurs, not changing with the times, not looking at the real data, the real information. And many incredulous doctors are rolling their eyes and saying, what is going on with you? These agencies that are supposed to have everyone else's health in mind, they care about as much as the agencies that claim to prevent the importation of illicit narcotics and end up importing them themselves and selling them through LA with Freeway Rick Ross as their patsy.
Help stamp out quackery.
If you don't know the story of Freeway Rick Ross, I highly recommend looking into it. But it's nothing new. The real criminals always wear suits and ties, and they always want you to point the finger at your neighbor because they always want you to make an enemy out of someone else. And now that people aren't even able to say certain things, when I've seen how easy it is for my video to get censored, how many of mine have been deleted. I had a strike before this on the same channel, not for a video I made recently, but for a video that was about the Health and Human Services from about 4 years ago. And it was just reading an article and a claim that they were making, which I didn't believe or agree with. We are unable to even speak our grievances and disagree. What kind of a society do we really have? And it kind of pisses me off, but it kind of makes me just scoff and just roll my eyes and say, I kind of figured we were going to end up here. I knew that the people would end up going along with their oppressors because they're giving up the true idea of freedom in order to have this idea of safety. But there ain't no safety, baby. There's no safety. Every one of us is going to die. We can put up barriers, we can put up walls, religion, and ideas about what we think is right and wrong. We can take certain precautions, but the precautions that we do take, they have to fit the danger. And the danger seems to be over right now, and we're not acting like it. People are more scared than ever. And I think it's sad because I don't want to see people fearful. I want to see people living their lives and smiling and talking to one another. We've lost something in the last couple of years, and I think it's time to get it back. Because mental illness right now something not a lot of people want to talk about. Suicide, depression, anxiety are at an all-time high. And it definitely, the situation of fear is not helping people. I know I've spoken on this before about overdose deaths, and I've mentioned this because, as I said, a couple of years ago, our niece died from an overdose. Since then, I think the overdoses that year were one of the highest at like 75,000 people had died from opioid overdoses. Well, last year was the first year it hit 100,000. So there you go, 30% increase. That's a very significant increase in overdoses. People are upset and sad, and we need to have some sort of a future worth living for. And for a lot of people, the idea of just kind of isolating for a while, right? Because it's the right thing to do. As I heard somebody point out, this Karen Skoda, she had a great point this morning on a live, she is a mental health counselor, and she had a YouTube chat where she talked about, how she felt about what was going on, and she was afraid of losing her job. And she only, she doesn't have a whole bunch of viewers. She was just afraid that her work would see it, I believe, and fire her because they didn't want her talking about her opinions on mandates or anything like that. And I thought, wow, it's just sad that people have to take such a risk to speak about mental health. It's almost like stigmatized to the point where we can't have a civil discussion about the most important things out there. I don't know what to think anymore, but I know that I try not to let it get to me. I mean, I live my life, my family does what we do, and we live our lives as best we can and enjoy ourselves and get out there and do things. The last couple of years hasn't held us back, really. I just see a lot of people suffering because of it, and I guess time will tell. Maybe I'll end up seeing the long-term results of the damage done in the future, but I just hope we can move past this all now, get back to our lives. Thoughts welcome, as usual. Just remember, a lot of these people out there that are in charge, that are, waving a flag, they're waving that flag with one hand and their other hand is in your pocket. It's the way it's always been. Till people wake up to that, then we'll be in the same shit stew. Peace out. Thanks for listening.
Help stamp out quackery.
Thanks for coming to Carlos channel, yo. Yeah.